from Syria. Joining us from Damascus via Skype is Syrian journalist Danny Makki. Danny, can you describe for us what it was like to be in Damascus last night?
Well, in the early hours of yesterday morning, around 4:30, there was a number of US-led attacks near Damascus in different segments and parts of the city, and I essentially awoke to what was about 12 different strikes consecutively, one after the other. So it was pretty terrifying initially. After the situation cleared initially, you had Syrian air defenses began to launch S-200 missiles and tracer fire at the sky in an attempt to down some of the rockets which were coming through, but to no avail. The attack continued for about 50 continuous minutes with temporary pauses in between after different waves targeted different buildings. And what I could gauge initially from the area I'm currently located in, which is in western Damascus, was that 3 different military sites were targeted after the first wave. One of those was the research center in East Damascus in Berze, which has been used as a research laboratory and has a relation to the issue of chemical weapons. Some have been technologically developed there. The second location was Mezze Military Airport, which is the only airport within the confines of Damascus. And the third location, which is very close to where I am now, was Jamraya, which is also a huge complex of a research facility, which was previously targeted by the Israelis in 2014, if you remember, a couple of years ago. So the 3 different military targets were all struck almost simultaneously. And after the first wave of rocket attacks, I could hear jets in the sky. So I can confirm to you that it wasn't just rockets, it was jets as well. And the Syrian air defenses reportedly downed about 13 rockets.
And Danny, for residents of Damascus, what was the expectation before, in the build-up to all of this? Were people concerned that civilians might get caught up in this?
Well, absolutely. The first 2 days in the aftermath, you could say, of the suspected chemical weapons attack, everyone in Damascus and in Syria was on very high alert, expecting an immediate and imminent attack by the United States of America. Now, after you could say 48 hours of political jostling and political maneuvering, it seemed as if the situation began to go on a process of de-escalation. So people in Damascus just continued their lives. They didn't expect any impending strike. So what happened in the early hours of this morning was that people were very shocked and surprised initially by this US attack, which no one really thought could happen at this time. And after what you could say is probably around 2 hours of initial chaos, people went back to their lives, went back to going to work, etc. What you got to know is that people here have spent 7 years in war, so they've grown accustomed to these situations. But it's very strange from my perspective, being a British citizen as well, to be basically in the eye of what is a US, UK and French-led attack. So from that perspective, it was pretty scary, and life has gradually gone back to normal now after the early
Well,
hours,
Danny, that's what I wanted
attack.
to ask you about. What's the reaction this morning from what you can gauge?
Well, I mean, the reaction is definitely one of surprise, of shock, of it's a very strange and unique moment because it's unprecedented. This is the first time the US has targeted Damascus or around Damascus since the beginning of the Syria crisis. You've got over 500,000 people who have been killed in this crisis, and for the US to take some action after 7 years has really gotten to people in Damascus that the situation is very tense. Now, the presidency page in Syria uploaded a video of the president going into work as usual this morning, and that's probably another ploy just to show the world that things are continuing as normal. But I can definitely tell you that in the hours between 4:30 and 5:30 this morning, things were not normal at all, and that this was not initially a symbolic strike in an airfield in the middle of nowhere. This was a strike within and around Damascus for the first time since the start of the Syria crisis. Now, we've also heard intense reports of strikes around Hama and Homs. The Homs strike has been confirmed. So we're getting reports now of more strikes around Syria which have happened, but have taken longer to confirm due to the fact that they're quite far away from Damascus. What I can now tell you is that there are Russian jets in the sky around Damascus and around Homs. And this is the main reason for this is them potentially warding off more US-led strikes or acting as a deterrent for any future impending attacks today. And I've heard those for the last hour here in Damascus.
All right. Danny Makki, a Syrian journalist speaking to us from Damascus. Thank you very much. Fascinating update. Thanks a lot for joining us on the show today.
Sure.
All right, we're going